Hello everybody, welcome to Coffee and Content, the weekly live stream about live streaming, video and content creation. My name's John Lacey. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've had a great week. It's Sunday here in Australia. I realize other people, the joy of time zones has been sort of exasperated for me a little bit this week because of some daylight saving stuff. So it always likes to keep me on my toes, but it's really important to know when you're to the calendar tools. But anyway, today we're talking all about why I like OBS Studio. And again, I've had this question crop up a little bit lately, so I really wanted to address it. And we'll get into that in a moment, but this is obviously Coffee and Content. We're going out to a whole bunch of different places, so let me know in the chat where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. And if you've got any questions about OBS Studio specifically or live streaming generally, please let me know in the chat. I'd love to hear from you. But this is Coffee and Content, so this is a show that is powered by caffeine, so I better take a sip of coffee before we get started. Today we're talking about OBS Studio on Coffee and Content. My name's John Lacey. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is a tool that I talk about quite a lot, and you know, in some ways people can find this a little bit daunting, but it's a really useful tool. So I want to talk to you about why I like it and why I use it, and the different ways that you might like to consider using it in the future as well. So I guess the first thing to note about OBS Studio specifically is that it is literally free and open source. So you can go and download this from obsproject.com. So this is free and open source software. It's available for Windows, Macs, and Linux. You can download it from this website. It's very, very easy and straightforward to download and install. It does require a little bit of a learning curve, and that's kind of what I want to talk about today and sort of moving forward as well. So just keep that in mind. But we're going to talk about it, and I don't want you to be too daunted by this because a lot of people are, and I'm here to tell you it's not as scary as it might seem. So, you know, keep that in mind. But it's literally free, and especially if you've been, you know, if you've bought some cameras, if you bought some lighting, if you bought some microphone and audio equipment recently, it might be a really good place to save some money. There are lots of live streaming tools and video creation tools out there, and a lot of them these days are actually sort of monthly subscriptions. So make sure if you are investing in some of those sorts of things that you have actually factored that into your budget, because it can creep up on you. And I know lots of people that use a whole bunch of monthly subscriptions, and $15, $30, $80 here, there, doesn't sound too much, but once you start putting them all together, it can be quite expensive. And OBS is literally free, as I say. It's open source software, so you can go and download the program from the website, obsproject.com. And it's, you know, it's available for Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. And that in itself is amazing because some of the other tools that are out there are only available for Mac or only available for Windows. This is something that you can potentially learn how to use and actually use across all kinds of different computers and different platforms. So another thing that I want to mention is that OBS Studio is something that we associate predominantly with live streaming, but the truth is it actually has a whole bunch of other uses as well. So you can record local video to your personal computer. And this can be super awesome if you need to share something really, really quickly. Maybe you're making a tutorial for a work colleague. Maybe you need to report a bug in some software. It's really not that difficult to sort of get started and incorporate that into what you're doing. So that in itself is amazing. And again, I know some people are really scared of going live, and the reality is you really don't have to. You can do things locally. Of course, it is worth mentioning that live streaming is something that a lot of people do use OBS Studio specifically for, and it is a great tool for that. When I spoke with my video and live streaming show co-host Sam Proof recently, he sort of made the point that it really is a fully functioning production studio. It can do all of the things. And again, for beginners, I want to let you know that as powerful as it is, you don't need to know all the features, you don't need to know all the settings. And it's probably really useful when you're just starting out to put those blinders on and just focus on the things that you need to focus on. So keep that in mind as well. But if you are interested in live streaming, it's a great place to start. You can set up some scenes, you can add your sources, you can think about how you're using those things and put them together. I guess the other thing I should mention too, working with OBS Studio is whether you're doing it locally, a local recording, or whether you're doing it live out to destinations, it's a different way of approaching video, because traditionally what you would do is you would record your video, you'd go into your editing software and you would edit it and you'd render it and you'd upload it to wherever it's going to live. That is actually a completely valid way of working, but the live streaming option is a different approach. So you can actually think about how you're setting up your scenes, and essentially you're doing your presentation in real time. You will have a recording at the end of that you can go in and edit, and especially if you're looking to repurpose your content for things like YouTube Shorts and TikTok, that's a great way of doing it. But the reality is you don't have to, and I personally enjoy editing video. It is something that I do actually genuinely enjoy. I know a lot of people don't, but it's something I like. But if you don't want to work in a situation where you have to edit video, just taking a little bit of time to think about your presentation up front and just making sure that you've got those scenes and sources ready to go, you can do it pretty much in real time. And maybe you make a couple of small edits. Maybe you just leave it as is. It doesn't really matter too much, but it's a completely different mindset. And I think that's something that people don't always appreciate when they get started at first. And like I say, live streaming, pre-recorded, edited videos, they're both perfectly good tools in your toolbox. You just need to think about when is most appropriate to reach for one or the other. But in terms of the other feature that is in OBS Studio, and this is the one that I'm really, really excited about, and people don't know this exists, and it does exist in some other pieces of software, but it's not everywhere, and that's the ability to use a virtual camera. And this virtual camera essentially will replace any webcam that you're using in any kind of software. So you can use this in things like Microsoft Teams or Zoom or Google Meet. But essentially, you can set up your scene. You can include things like colors and branding elements and calls to action and promotional images. And you can just literally use that wherever you would normally use a webcam. And it may be as simple as just putting your name underneath you on your camera. It may be cropping things out that are unattractive in the background that you physically can't move. It could be as elaborate as incorporating a green screen and bringing that into the software. I know that things like Microsoft Teams do have sort of virtual background options. Unfortunately, they're not great at removing the backgrounds, and you will often see, especially if people are moving around quite a lot, you will see that they show parts of the background, and that can really ruin the effect. OBS Studio is actually a lot better at handling that itself. So I actually do use a lot of virtual backgrounds. I'm sort of in front of a green screen 24/7 because of the way that my space is arranged. And it does the removal of that green in OBS Studio is so much smoother than it is in a lot of other software programs. So that's something that I like to use and I like to keep in mind, but it doesn't need to be elaborate. So it could literally just be your standard webcam, maybe a little bit of text, maybe another image. And if you're interested in sort of exploring that idea a little bit more, check out on the YouTube channel, Learn Live Streaming, you can check out the OBS Studio Challenge where I walk you through some of the things that you can do in terms of getting that started. Okay, so this is Coffee and Content. My name's John Lacey. I feel like I'm talking quite a lot, so I'm going to take a break and just have a sip of coffee. It's funny, I was actually getting prepared for next week's show before going live today, and I got a little bit distracted, and I thought, no matter what else happens, I need my coffee for this show because this is literally coffee and content, and without enough caffeine, I'm pretty useless. So it's a really important thing for me to keep in mind, but that's okay. So today on Coffee and Content, the weekly live stream about video, live streaming and content creation, we're talking all about why I like OBS Studio. And again, it's a question that crops up from time to time. Some people are a little bit daunted about the black box experience that is OBS Studio when they first open it up. And I want to try and help people sort of overcome the fear of that a little bit. And that's part of the reason that I create the content that I do create. And if you're on YouTube, head over to Learn Live Streaming. I'd love it if you could subscribe and check out the content. And if you do have OBS questions, if you do have general live streaming, video or content creation questions, please hit me up because I'd love to talk about those in future live streams. So we've sort of already addressed the fact that OBS Studio is literally free, which is amazing, especially in sort of harder economic times. But another thing, we've also discussed the three basic things you can do with OBS Studio in terms of local video recording, live streaming, and also the use of that virtual camera. And the virtual camera is amazing. I will never stop talking about it because it really is so good, and I wish more people sort of knew about it because it will change your life. So another thing that I really appreciate about OBS Studio is there's actually a community of developers that extend its core functionality with plugins and scripts. So out of the box, OBS can already do a lot, but there are things that maybe you want to do that aren't sort of standard within the software. And the really wonderful thing about this is that there are people out in the community, developers, that are spending their time and energy, often making these things available for free, to help you actually do even more with OBS Studio. And, you know, there are all kinds of plugins. Sam Proof and I have discussed some of our favorites on the video and live streaming show. I've just got a list here, so I'll just mention them really, really briefly. And if you want to know more about these ones specifically, you can head over to the YouTube channel and check out that episode. But OBS ASIO is one of my favorites. So it actually, if you have a device that that supports the ASIO technology, and I actually use a Rodecaster Pro, which is sort of like an audio interface crossed with a mixing board. And I can bring in a number of different things. I can bring in different microphone inputs. I can bring in Bluetooth, so I can actually call somebody on the phone and bring them into my live stream or my recording. I've also got a sound pad, which is that thing that I've been pressing just before I take a sip of coffee on this show. And the nice thing about the Rodecaster Pro, especially in conjunction with this particular plugin, the OBS ASIO plugin, is that I can actually bring in individual channels from my Rodecaster as their own inputs into the software. And this is big. And on that scene, you can hear the sound pad with that intro music, but my mic is not on that scene. So if I'm accidentally muttering to myself before the show, which is something that can happen, let's be real, it's not going to go out on my live stream. And that's really, really handy. And it's funny, I do use other live streaming tools for different shows. And one of the things I have to remind myself at the end of, if I'm using Restream Studio, for example, is that if I mute my audio there, I mute everything. So I have to be really careful at the end of that show when I play the outro music not to mute myself. And that's something I totally stuffed up yesterday. So again, I really appreciate the ability to bring those tracks in individually. Again, another thing I really love is the waveform visualizer and the scale to sound. Again, if you saw the opening sequence, and even if you didn't see the opening sequence, you'll see a similar thing at the end of this stream. But you'll see that I've actually got this waveform that reacts to that intro music or outro music. And I've also got the artwork for this particular show, and it'll actually zoom in and out to the music as well. So some of Sam's favorite plugins from that particular show were the source record. So that's the ability to record individual elements within your OBS Studio scenes. And that way, maybe you want to grab, just your webcam by itself, or just your video camera, or just some audio, whatever it happens to be. You can sort of get that individually. That can be quite useful. The move transition is a really wonderful plugin as well. You can actually duplicate an existing scene, rearrange all the elements onto the screen, and when you transition between those, it will actually do that in a really smooth way. It's very nice to look at, actually. And Sam's final plugin from that six favorite plugins episode is the directory watch media. So that actually looks for changes to files within a particular media, a particular directory, I should say. And again, if you want to find out more about that, you can certainly check that out. So keep in mind that, even if, and again, this is probably something that's maybe for more advanced users. But there is the ability to extend that software with the use of those plugins and the scripts. So this is actually the OBS Studio forum. So over at OBS Project, you'll see that we actually have a whole section for plugins. And we can have a look at those. There's 9 pages of them. I don't know. I think there's 173 different plugins, and they'll do all kinds of different things. Again, I probably wouldn't get too carried away with these if you're only a beginner when it comes to OBS Studio. But it is really great to know that these things exist, and maybe, if you're looking for a solution to a problem you're having, or if you want to extend your live stream or your video recordings in a particular way, this is a really great place to start, and all of these ones are free. There are certainly other things elsewhere. The Atom vertical plugin is something we talk about from time to time on this show, and it's really beautiful because it actually gives you the ability to stream or record or both in both horizontal and vertical formats at the same time. And if you're making, traditional YouTube videos, you can actually set up equivalent scenes to that in the vertical format. And that way, that's all recorded. You can go in and grab those shorter clips and work on those for things like TikTok and YouTube Shorts and Instagram and Facebook Reels. So there's all kinds of things you can do. So I guess that actually brings me quite elegantly to another point that I want to talk about in terms of why I personally like OBS Studio. And that is simply that it is something that you can actually grow into. So again, I know often people are slightly daunted about the fact that it can be quite powerful, it can be a little bit overwhelming at first. But again, if you put that to one side, if you focus on the basics to get started, and again, head over to johnlacey.com. I've got plenty of resources there for you. And if you've got questions, hit me up as well. I'd love to answer those. But once you get started, you can actually, you can literally just be you on the screen with your video and your microphone. Or it can be something that's really as elaborate as a professional television show. Like you could actually use somebody else to produce the program, and maybe they'll do things like bring on comments at different times when you've got that in the chat. Maybe they'll switch to different segments. Maybe they'll play different pre-recorded media. There's all kinds of things that you can actually do to make a really elaborate production. And again, that's not something I recommend for beginners, but the nice thing is if you do decide you want to go in that direction, that is something that you can certainly move into and grow into over time. Often with some of the easier, the more basic tools, they're wonderful to start with. And again, no shade against any of the other tools. They're all wonderful. And again, it's really about what's going to work for you and your process and your workflow. So if OBS Studio isn't for you, that's totally fine. Please find something that'll work for you. And again, Restream Studio, StreamYard are both pretty straightforward ways of getting started, especially if you're in a position where you're talking to another guest on your show. That's a really good place to start. But again, if you want to maybe start building I guess in some ways, and I do use Restream Studio and I've come to like it, but to be really honest with you, I'm a bit of a control freak and I had to take some time to embrace their defaults and their templates and just relinquish some of that control. And I know if I'm in OBS Studio, I can do anything I want. So I mean that's certainly part of the reason why I like this software. I think it's really quite amazing. And again, you can start simply, but you can do much more advanced things when and if you decide to go in that direction. And again, it's a great thing. Like if you are in a show where you do have an external producer, you can literally just be the on-air talent. You can be on the on-camera talent, and you can actually let them control some of the other elements of the show, and that can be really, really powerful and really, really useful. So this is Coffee and Content, the weekly live stream about video, live streaming, and content creation. My name's John Lacey. Today I'm talking all about why I like OBS Studio, the free and open source software for video recording, video streaming, and the use of that virtual camera feature, which is so incredibly useful. So I'm going to just take another sip of coffee. So I hope you're well caffeinated, if that's appropriate, where you are in your particular time zone. But I'm going to take another sip. I do actually need a certain amount of coffee to just function. So it's kind of important that I do make sure that I am well caffeinated. There are two dangerous states of being for me, and one of them is undercaffeinated and the other is overcaffeinated. So we've got to find that sweet spot. But this is the Coffee and Content Show. I hope you've been enjoying what we've been talking about today in terms of actually using OBS Studio. And again, today I'm talking very conceptually about why I like this software, because it does come up from time to time. People don't always understand why I choose this in favor of some other options. But I guess what I wanted to articulate is one, you know, the fact that it's free, it's open source, it's always being updated, and it's getting better and better all the time is really quite amazing. But even the ability to use that virtual camera is amazing. And I know Ecamm is a piece of software that is used for live streaming. I know it, or I understand it has a virtual camera feature. It's amazing, but it's only available for Mac. I'm not a Mac user. I'm probably not going to be a Mac user anytime in the immediate future. So, I mean, if you're happy using that tool, by all means. But I guess the other thing too is that this OBS Studio is sort of a great tool to have in your back pocket. You don't have to use it for everything. And I think that's something that I want to encourage people and content creators, especially, to think more critically about, is taking, being aware of all the things that you have at your disposal and thinking sort of critically about what is actually most important and most useful for any given piece of content, for any given project, for any given deliverable. And again, it's if you're not a Mac user, if you're not an Ecamm user, this is a really great way of using that virtual camera feature, because that is a feature that doesn't really exist in Restream or StreamYard. I know there are other options, but even the ability to change how you show up in your web camera meetings, your Microsoft Teams, your Zoom, your Google Meet meetings, anywhere that you can show up, you can add just a little bit of branding, a little bit of personality. You can sort of curate how you actually show up in the physical video frame. And again, that's not difficult, and it is free. And again, it may not be the tool for everything you're doing. You may not use it for all of the functionality, but I just think it's really important to have some things in your back pocket. And especially if someone reaches out to you and they want to start, but they don't have a budget. Maybe they're only working, maybe they're a charity. Maybe they don't have a lot of disposable income to invest in software, or maybe they've just bought a lot of equipment. That in itself makes OBS a really good option. So I'm going to be talking in coming weeks about some of the the more practical how-to aspects of using OBS Studio. Next week on the show, we're talking about working with scenes. This is something we spoke about a little bit on my other show with Sam Proof, the video and live streaming show. We spoke quite conceptually about a lot of those things, but I really want to get into the nitty gritty next week and actually show you how to physically do things in OBS Studio. We're going to be talking about working with scene collections. We're going to be talking about working with scenes, creating new scenes, removing scenes, duplicating scenes, using the studio mode option, using keyboard shortcuts, using one of my favorite tools, the Elgato Stream Deck. You can set up buttons to do all kinds of wonderful things on your computer, not just in terms of OBS Studio, but certainly in terms of OBS Studio. So you can, there's plenty of great stuff. And I think moving forward, I'd love to hear a little bit more feedback from the people watching. So if there are specific things that you would like to know or you'd like me to cover in the future, please let me know. I'd love to hear that. But I think on this show, I'm going to try and focus more on practical things that we can actually do to really work on our content creation and make sure we get our message out, and we do it in a meaningful way, and also in a way that, we're productive, we have particular workflows for doing things. So again, if you want to learn more about anything that I'm doing, you can head over to johnlacey.com. I've got various articles about the things that we're covering. Also, if you head down to the very bottom of this particular website, there's a whole bunch of social links. So if you want to catch up with me, I'm particularly active on LinkedIn and YouTube. So let me know if there's anything I can help you with in terms of OBS, about video, about live streaming, about content creation more generally, because I think it all comes back to what are we actually doing to share our message in a meaningful way and get word out there, and also help people. I mean, I'm basically a teacher at heart, so I'm very focused on showing people how to physically do things. And again, I think that's going to be the focus of this particular show moving forward. So thank you for your company today. I've really appreciated it. And again, you don't need to make OBS Studio your entire world, but if I were you, I would give it a go, because I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And again, if you need support and resources, reach out to me. Head over to johnlacey.com. And let me know if you've got questions or if there are particular things that you'd like me to cover, because I'd love to hear from you. So again, thank you so much. I'm going to go and enjoy the rest of my coffee and the rest of my day. I hope you have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you again soon.